There are plenty of seats closer to the front if those of you, like a bad student, want to sit in the back, but the opportunity to be up here in the National Education Association in the front row, that's where you're really supposed to be. So there's plenty of space. So I hope you'll come on up. Before I say anything further, I just want to introduce Princess Moss, who is our hostess this evening, and bringing us into this wonderful facility, one that's so substantive that I wish I could just spend the rest of my life here. But thank you so much for having us again this year, and please welcome us.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. A special good evening to the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and to all of tonight's awardees, and to those who stand up for human rights around the world. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. On behalf of the 3 million members of the National Education Association who work for public education across this nation, I thank you and I welcome you to our house. It is an honor to host this event tonight. I will respect your rights regardless of who you are. I will raise my voice. I will take action. I will use my rights to stand up for your rights. Those are some of the words from the UN Human Rights Pledge that remind us of our great moral duty to ensure that human rights prevail across time, across culture, and across continents. 70 years of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. This treaty has stood the test of time. Upon his release from prison, Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "We're all moved by the fact that freedom is indivisible, convinced that the denial of the rights of one diminish the freedom of others," end quote. The National Education Association has been dedicated to human rights and international relations for more than a century. Through our work with Education International, in which our National Education Association president, Lily Eskelsen Garcia, is a vice president, we spread that message and advocacy to over 30 million education employees in 178 nations. We have had a strong partnership and commitment to the UN for more than 70 years. Our NEA resolutions support the full United States engagement in funding and participation in the UN and all its agencies. For decades, our nation has been a global leader in protecting the human rights of all people, whether they are within the United States or beyond. In 1948, as the newly formed United Nations unanimously adopted the UN Declaration for Human Rights, it was and still is today, with 193 member states in the United Nations and the Holy See in Palestine as observers, it is the most widely adopted international treaty. Yes, that's a round of applause. Like you, we too were stunned earlier this year with the announcement by Secretary of State Pompeo and Ambassador Haley that the United States will withdraw from the UN Human Rights Council. Clearly, this action isolates the United States outside of the global community of nations. By leaving the UN Human Rights Council, it makes it very hard to justify legitimacy of the State Department's annual country reports on human rights practices, which it states covers internationally recognize individual, civil, political, and worker rights as set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international agreements. The National Education Association fully understands and appreciates that advocacy for human rights takes work and dedication to making real the fulfillment of human potential. It also takes international cooperation, not isolation. By stepping away from this United Nations body, we have placed our democratic nation and all our citizens at risk for greater global threats and violence. And as a result, the National Education Association has formally implored the President to reconsider this decision. Despite many of our global challenges, I am hopeful. I am hopeful because of the commitment of brave people in this room and the role of the United Nations Association. NEA will continue to fight with you, guided by our mission, which is to unite our members and the nation to fulfill the promise of public education, to prepare every student to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. At times of great challenge and threats to civil and human rights, we must reconnect with our core values. They speak to who we are. Our core values, like a beacon, guide our quest and illuminate our search for a path forward through some of the world's greatest challenges. One of NEA's core values is a just society, by which we proclaim that we believe public education is vital to building respect for worth, dignity, and equality of every individual in our diverse society. Aspiring for justice in a diverse society requires each of us to examine our own views and our own biases about race, class, gender, sexual orientation, religion, disability, and immigrant status. It means challenging injustice where it exists. It means speaking up for the bullied student. It means standing together with immigrant students and their families to ensure that they are not locked out of our schoolhouses and denied the opportunity of an education. It means collectively raising our voices when millions of poor children and their families are denied access to adequate housing and health care. It means challenging racial and social injustice everywhere, anywhere, and whenever we see it. So let's, my friends, continue the fight together and call on everyone to stand with us as we face the critical crossroads in our history. United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, we have a long road to travel. Let us begin by celebrating the tireless and intrepid heroes and award winners here with us tonight who fight every day for human rights. Thank you, and again, welcome to our house.
Thank you very much. This is an unusual gathering of people because the people we're giving awards to were such leaders in their area and advocacy and support and capacity for human rights. They're being introduced by an equal number of people who have a great capacity and a background and a history in supporting human rights. And then the room's filled with people from government, academic, ambassadorial, United Nations, business, and so forth, who are also great purveyors of international collaboration, cooperation, and supporting human rights. So we're a gathering of people with a great deal of commonality of interest and support for each other. But because of the people being honored tonight, it gives us the occasion to come together and really focus on their achievements and our opportunity to applaud them and to give us hope and to give us optimism that we'll be able to go forward and make a difference. It's a tough time, though. We are finding that we're losing ground in some of the countries that are the bastions of democracy. I include this one. I think about Brazil. I think about Hungary. I think about a whole series of countries which had achieved the levels of beginning to be integrated and reaching the promise of the human rights that are declared in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But we're losing ground. We have so much to do. It's so important, therefore, that we're gathering regularly to celebrate this and infusing this set of ideas and concerns and activism into all of our programs. I loved what the representative Princess Moss said about education's role. In that respect, I want to say that our connection, our linkage between the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area and the NEA is, in fact, Jill Christensen. Would you stand up and be identified? Jill is the International Coordinator and Director of Programs internationally, spends most of her time on the road, as many of us in international development have done most of our lives. But she's also on our board and always attends our board meetings and participates and brings about this relationship. And we're so pleased that we have this relationship. So thank you, both of you, and to the other staff members here from NEA for that great nexus. One of the groups that's represented very well here, I can't name them all, and that's a faux pas on my part as a diplomat. There's so many people whose title is ambassador in this room, we don't dare try to do that. But there are two special people who qualify because they are ambassadors. In one case, the ambassador, Her Excellency, from Rwanda to the United States, and she gave me her card, and she said that it's... And that's Ambassador Matilda Mukantabamana. And did I get it right? I've tried, and she helped me, and I thank you very much. We're just delighted that you're here. You have had a long road from where you are, and it's almost the 25th anniversary of the genocide, and almost, I think it's the 24th year. And so thank you very much for being here as the ambassador now of Rwanda. We're so honored that you would be here. The other person we need to single out as an ambassador is not because he's from another country, but because one of our awards is named after Tex Harris, who is often described in the literature and for his great deeds as a diplomat of diplomats. And thank you, Tex Harris, for bringing you and your family here to be with us tonight. I'll just say, all of the rest of you who have the title ambassador, put your hand up and we'll know who you are. Okay. Reluctant. Thank you very, very much. That was a very thoughtful presentation about what we have to live up to in terms of the Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm not going to repeat some of the wonderful things that Princess said. But one of the things I carry around with me now, I also carry around that little chart of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is probably the lightest UN document in history to carry around. Most of them are now 150 pages, 9 by 11, beautifully printed in 7 languages. But this has weightier, lasting capacity and magnificence. And I just encourage you to get a copy of it. It's easily online, or we can send you all one, and read it every couple of months, because it gives you the framework in which keeps our feet grounded. Do we have one on the seat? Okay, then tonight's homework is to reread this. It's very important, very thoughtful, and brings us together, and will be the bondage, if you will, that will take us to recognize that. I'll just read the 1 3-line opening. The recognition of the inherent dignity and of equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. That's the framework in which we're gathered here tonight, whether it's about U.S. domestic improvement in the neighborhoods of D.C., or whether it's around the world in some of the countries that are on the front page, or whether it's also in our special programs that we're honoring tonight as well. So thank you very much for taking your homework home with me. Let me thank all the sponsors. I'm not going to thank them all. They're listed in the program, and you'll see them. The organizational sponsors will be listed behind me. Maybe they are, because I'm speaking. Yes, look at the coincidence of that. And also all of the individual sponsors are also listed in the program, an outstanding group of people who believe in these programs, who believe in the United Nations of the National Capital Area, and we exist and are able to perform what we do because of predominantly individual giving, and then a number of organizations who are our partners and our friends. And that's been so important to the well-being of this chapter of the United Nations. I also want to recognize that in addition to my mentioning UNA-NCA, that the president of UNA-USA, Chris Watley, is also, where are you, Chris? There you are. Thank you very much. He oversees 120 chapters, I believe, across the country, and it's just a growing coordination of people whom he brings to Washington and he brings to New York and makes a huge difference in actions to support the things we're going to be talking about tonight. Let me also express my thanks to Paula Boland, for whom I'm a volunteer, and I'm from time to time in their office. But let me tell you, the capacity of this institution is in the hands of Paula. Would you please stand up? Thank you very much. And for this program, they have been working tirelessly, I can tell you, tirelessly ever since we last met on UN Day, which was only a few weeks ago. It's hard to believe. And along with Paula are Andrew and Nicole and Bonnie. Where are you? Just raise your hand. Thank you very much for your support. And we're brought together each year in this format by the hard work of our Human Rights Committee. It's chaired by Heather Hill. Where is Heather? Thank you very much, Heather. And would the other members of her committee stand up and take a bow for their hard work all year for making this possible? Thank you. And finally, before we get on to the awards presentations, I want to call on two of our special donors, partners, supporters. First of all, I want to call up Mike Marsh, who is with the Northern Trust Bank, who has been a partner with this institution for a very long time and has a special heart and interest in this, as well as a banker. He's a social change agent going back through his entire career. And Mike, would you come up and just say a few words?
Thank you very much, Steve. And Paula, thank you very much as well. And my fellow board members and volunteers and members of the United Nations Association. On behalf of Northern Trust and my Northern Trust partners in the room, John Gosson, could you stand up, please? And Brian Heilman. They're with us. They're both portfolio managers, and they are CFAs. And if they're here afterwards, please feel free to talk with them. I just want to say that we're very proud to be a sponsor, once again, of the United Nations Association's Human Rights Awards. On a personal level, I also want to just say that I'm a board member. I volunteer with the Finance Committee as well, and I've been introduced to the United Nations when I was in my early 20s, before the Gray, when I was a UNHCR volunteer teaching English as a second language in Southeast Asia for Vietnamese, Khmer, and Lao refugees that were en route to the United States. I later moved to DC in 2000 and was introduced to a very powerful and yet sensitive woman, Dawn Calabria. Could you please stand? Dawn, fellow board member. Dawn introduced me to the United Nations Association, and ever since I've been a member. So again, I just want to thank everyone. And if anyone is not a member in the room, please consider joining. I'm a lifetime member. That means I believe Paul is the same as $1,000 per year, and you never have to pay dues again. So consider doing that, but I'll keep it short, no notes. Thank you very much. We have a fact sheet on what we do at Northern Trust in the back. I oversee our tax-exempt investment services for the East Coast. And if anyone is involved with a not-for-profit organization, an NGO, that is about to put out an RFP or would like to talk, please feel free to take a fact sheet and get in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Our other wonderful partner on a regular basis is the United Nations Information Center. I don't think everyone knows it, but there are 20 United Nations agencies represented here in Washington, and they are interconnected through an office called UNIC, UN Information Center, which Stefania Parinelli is in charge of as its acting director, has returned to us after being here for 2 years ago. Thank you very much. Would you carry a message to us?
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I'm really honored to be here with you tonight to represent UNIC, the United Nations Information Center, to be here with the United Nations Association National Capital Area, and to be here with the National Education Association. I really appreciated both your comments and the previous speakers. We are here to commemorate the 70th anniversary of a document that never gets old. And it's actually more current now than it was possibly in the past. And when it comes to defending human rights, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I have to wear my glasses now. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Former US First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and the other delegates who generated such a watershed document. We stand also on the shoulders of human rights defenders who gave their lives and freedom so our rights can be protected. We have a responsibility to preserve and bring forward a treasure so many have fought for. And I am particularly honored to be here with the human rights defenders who are going to receive the annual UN Association Award. Congratulations, and you are an inspiration for all of us. And now I'm very pleased to leave you with the message of the UN Secretary General.
For 70 years, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been a global beacon, shining a light for dignity, equality, and well-being, and bringing hope to dark places. The rights proclaimed in the Declaration apply to everyone, no matter our race, belief, location, or other distinction of any kind. Human rights are universal and eternal. They are also indivisible. One cannot pick and choose among civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Today, we also honor the human rights defenders, risking their lives to protect people in the face of rising hatred, racism, intolerance, and repression. Indeed, human rights are under siege around the world. Universal values are being eroded, the rule of law is being undermined, and now more than ever, our shared duty is clear. Let us stand up for human rights for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefania. With a video like that, you feel as though the Secretary General's in the room and just drawing us in. That's just wonderful. I'm about to, in a second, introduce the first presenter to make the first award. But this is an unusual time for us. 3 key representatives in our lives, all of ours, passed away within the last 6 months. One of our own advisory council members, Princeton Lyman, who was ambassador to Nigeria, ambassador to South Africa, special envoy in South Sudan. Probably best remembered, as George Moose would probably say, for his extraordinary work in bringing together Nelson Mandela 2 years out of prison with Mr. de Klerk. They weren't really talking very closely, but Princeton Lyman made it possible for them over a period of time to get to know each other, to trust each other, and to build what became the post-apartheid era in South Africa. One of the greatest extraordinary achievements that's ever been brought about under very difficult circumstances. And it's the personality and that style, that low-key patience of Princeton Lyman that made that possible and made that successful. I'm sorry he's not with us. Passed away only 2 months ago, but has been a very strong supporter of the United Nations Association for many, many years and served on its advisory council. Another key person, of course, who has passed away in recent times is the Kofi Annan, whom a number of people have had the great pleasure and opportunity to honor him. I had the pleasure of being at a dinner the other night where his niece and his niece's husband from Ghana live in the Rockville area, and she spoke eloquently about being a young woman watching her uncle grow up and lead the world with such passion and dedication and such delicacy, and the contribution to human rights by his style, again, that low-key, patient process by which he brought people together and enveloped them to get to know each other and to converse and to bring about a long-term peace, if you will, in many, many instances. And then the third person, notes between my pages, is, of course, George H.W. Bush. And I mentioned him while there are controversies about human rights records, about a former president in that case. I listened to all the speeches at the funeral yesterday, and I listened to one theme that kept coming back over and over again about his presidency. It was so influenced by his being ambassador of the United States to the United Nations. And coming back from that experience and having that influence the other roles he played as vice president and later as president, I think the process by which the United Nations brings about conversation, dialogue, steadiness on these issues that we're talking about tonight must have had a tremendous influence on him and how he looked at the power of the United States presidency as being one that can be carried out effectively by recognizing we're one of many, many nations. We're not the nation responsible for other nations. We're the nation responsible to work with nations throughout the world on a continuous, collaborative basis. So all three of those gentlemen had characteristics of low-key, steady, patience, engagement, involvement of people, and sometimes that's what we're missing today, and we'll miss all of them. So I just wanted to recognize their relationship to our purpose tonight as well, just in terms of their lives and leaving us over the last year. To present the first award, let me say I'm very pleased and honored to ask Connie Morella, who has been actually one of my long-term representatives in Congress, I think for 16 years, 8 consecutive wins. That's almost impossible to do, and is probably the most consistent person to cut across party lines and people lines, not unlike those gentlemen I was just talking about. For years and years and years, and even after she left Congress, then she continued into other very critical roles, leading the bipartisan commission of former Congress people to collaborate, get together, and carry forward their lives' work with existing and current Congress leaders. And then she was appointed by George W. Bush to go and became ambassador. You didn't raise your hand when we called for ambassadors. She went to become ambassador from the U.S. to the OECD, a very important, significant role in development, and stayed there for 7 years. I read the other day in a biography, you left Paris grinning to go to Paris. So thank you very much for your service all those years in the Congress and for your service as ambassador to the OECD, and for bringing about the very kind of collaborative style as you're still doing here in Washington in the halls of Congress and among us in the neighborhood of Bethesda and so forth. Connie Morella, thank you.
Yeah, that introduction's just like I wrote it, you know, but I'm Connie Morella, and I approve this message. You're not going to hear that for a little bit now, so you have somewhat of a respite. But I'm reminded when you speak of great people who have passed, that actually came about because Senator McCain, in his campaign finance reform, had that part of it. It was called disclosure. And that's remained, but unfortunately the rest of the package didn't quite come out like we in Congress had hoped it would. It was Feingold and with Crichets and myself on the House side. But I want to welcome all of you here tonight. And as we talked about those who passed, I want to add what Steve had said about Kofi Annan, Princeton Lyman, and of course H.W. Bush. And I think all of us, regardless of political affiliation, were glued to the television set yesterday, and we heard the sense of humor. We heard the civility. We heard the kindness. And I guess I could add to that. I've known the Bushes, didn't always vote with them, as most of you know, but the night of my unelection in 2002, President W. Bush called me when I was talking to my supporters, and I was very appreciative. The next day, I went to my campaign office thinking about the letters I was going to write to thank people, and I got a phone call, and it was President H.W. Bush. He had no reason to do it, but he cared that much about trying to make somebody feel better. And so those are the kind of people that Steve mentioned that we're talking about, and I think they're like a lot of you who are here tonight. I do want to salute Steve. I want to salute Paula Boland, because they have worked so hard to make this all look so effortless, and we appreciate them very much. And it's my honor tonight to present the Louis B. Sohn Human Rights Award to Adama, now I'm going to say it right, Dieng. He is such an incredible man. The award, as you probably know, is named for Louis Sohn. He was a UN hero, a founding father pretty much, who drafted parts of the UN Charter in 1945, and he worked unrelentlessly to make the UN Declaration of Human Rights binding. He succeeded in 1948. So you know, there's criteria for who gets this award. The criteria for the award include respect for international human rights, as in the Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights, respect for other international treaties, and as a priority, elevating the role of NGOs in promoting and protecting human rights. Our awardee tonight ranks summa cum laude in all of them. He truly does. Adam Dieng is a Senegalese jurist. He's the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advisory on the Prevention of Genocide. He's been a catalyst to raise awareness of the causes of genocide, to alert relevant actors where there is a risk, to advocate and to mobilize for appropriate actions. What a task. Previously, he served as registrar of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and I'm pleased we have the ambassador from Rwanda here. As an aside, I can't resist. Rwanda has the greatest number of women in the legislature of any country, in the world. His extensive career, our awardee, includes Secretary General of the International Commission of Justice. He was a strong driving force that established the African Court on Human and People's Rights, as well as the African Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. All of that he has done so very well. He is indeed a leader deserving of the Louis B. Sohn Human Rights Award. As Shakespeare wrote, the force of his own merit makes his way. So please join me in congratulating Adama Dieng for the Louis B. Sohn Human Rights Award. I'll get this out of the way. I would love to. Oh, let's get over here so we can be seen here.
Thank you very much, Honorable Constance. I was so moved when Stephen made reference to the late Princeton Lyman. The last time I visited Washington, D.C., that was to have a breakfast with Princeton. We're together with the chairperson of the Institute for Peace, the USIP. To discuss what? To discuss the situation in South Sudan. Because as you may know, I was extremely concerned about the crisis in South Sudan. When that crisis erupted in December 2013, I was really worried and disappointed with the fact that the international community did not really pay attention to the importance of promoting reconciliation among the various ethnic groups in South Sudan. And then what we witnessed was a power struggle between two men, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. And today, more than 5 years after that crisis erupted, we are yet to see peace being restored in South Sudan. And I feel sad that our brother and friend, Princeton Lyman, did not witness that return for peace, which means we owe to Princeton Lyman to make every effort so that peace return in South Sudan. Just 3 days ago, I called on my colleague, the Special Advisor on Sexual Violence in Conflict, the Special Advisor on Children in Armed Conflict. The three of us issued a joint statement. Why? Because we were simply alarmed with the fact that more than 125 women and girls, the youngest of them was 10 years old, and so far the oldest was 65 old. This is simply unacceptable. So it is time really that we do justice to the people of South Sudan. Dear friends, it is with gratitude and pleasure that I join you this evening to receive this honor. And please be assured that I accept it with humility and grace, in the knowledge and conviction that for a public servant, there is no higher honor than the privilege to serve. Throughout my many years of service, I have been privileged to work in pursuit of justice, peace, democracy, and human rights. These might be separate concepts in the mind of theorists, but are part of the same set of common values that bind our humanity together. In our troubled world, while these values are enshrined in many constitutions around the world, they remain elusive and indeed distant dream to millions of our fellow citizens. As many of you might know, in my many years of service, I offered my contribution to strengthen the rule of law, fight impunity, and advance efforts to build solid judicial and democratic institutions. From the Regional and Labor Court in Senegal, through the Supreme Court of Senegal, the time when I met my brother and friend, Ambassador George Moose, in the office of the then Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Senegal, Kebambaye, who later became the Vice President of the International Court of Justice, a champion of the rule of law. And I'm glad that, George, you joined it this evening. And I should say that during the time I was with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that was the time when Kofi Annan brought me in this institution. As my current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and dear friend, was saying, Kofi was a man of inspiration. He was really the compass. And Kofi wanted to have fresh blood in the organization. He's the one who brought Guterres, who became the High Commissioner for Refugees. He brought me to bring also some harmony within the ICTR. And I can say that at that time, knowing Rwanda before the genocide of the Tutsis, knowing Rwanda today, I cannot but say thank you to Ambassador Mathilde for joining us. Rwanda is showing really that it is possible where there is a political will to really reconstruct a country. When I traveled early this year in the Western Balkan, I said to the presidents of Bosnia and Herzegovina, you should go to Rwanda and learn from their experience. Nothing is perfect, but efforts have been made in that country, and we need to continue to support those efforts in Rwanda. You mentioned it, Steve. Next year, we are going to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda. That will be a time for us to reflect again on that commitment which was made more than 70 years ago, when the world, after witnessing the Holocaust of the Jews, resolved that never again we will allow genocide. But never again became time and time again. We witnessed, as I said, the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda. We witnessed the genocide in Srebrenica. We witnessed genocide even in Cambodia, and this has been ruled recently by a decision of the chambers in Cambodia. And unfortunately, under our eyes, we witness what certainly tomorrow, before a court of justice, will be determined legally as a genocide. I'm referring to two situations. The first is the crimes committed in Iraq against the Yazidi population, and the second is the crimes committed in Myanmar. So, therefore, you may understand that for me it is extremely important to really continue to strive to advance accountability with firm belief that there can be no sustainable peace without justice. And there is no need to convince you of the profound significance of human rights, especially as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This commemoration should be an occasion for celebration, but also for reflection of how much has been achieved. Indeed, we should not dismiss how far we have advanced in the normative development of the overall framework of international human rights law. Yet, human rights are in crisis. Many of the basic tenets of the core international human rights instruments are being challenged, unfortunately. Challenged by the very countries that immensely contributed to put in place the framework we have today that has served us for more than 70 years. Day after day, we continue to witness violations that shame not only those who perpetrate them, but the international community as a whole, and especially those who are in a position to do something to stop them. Since 2005, reported battle-related deaths have increased tenfold, and the number of people forcibly displaced has reached record levels. Civilians find themselves increasingly in the middle of armed conflict. The gap between our words of commitment and the experience of vulnerable populations around the world has become worryingly high. Some of the challenges we face, from conflict to climate change or migration, show that no single country can solve the problems we face on its own. There is a need to strengthen international cooperation and multilateral institutions to respond to the dramatic challenges of today's crisis. Yet, we have seen a troubling decline in international commitment to multilateralism and respect for international human rights and rule of law. The international community needs to make its deeds match its words by committing the necessary political support and resources to multilateral institutions, including the United Nations itself. And that's why I cannot but really echo the words of Princess Rose when she spoke at the beginning of this event. In exercise of my mandate, I see this gap firsthand on a daily basis. While some states offer full support to my mandate, others are not even interested in hearing about my concerns for fear or shame of not acting upon them. Worryingly, there has been a dangerous increase in the number of situations that merit our urgent attention. The extreme forms of identity-based violence that we have witnessed in countries such as the Central African Republic, Iraq, Pakistan, South Sudan, and Syria are simply unacceptable. But equally intolerable are the serious human rights violations and abuses that different ethnic, religious, or national groups are suffering in Myanmar, Nigeria, or in the North Caucasus, to name just a few. Europe is facing a wave of populism that is slowly eroding the enjoyment of rights and promoting the rise of anti-Semitism, rise of racism, xenophobia, hate speech, and hate crimes. This should raise alarms, but the level of complacency is still strong. Here in the United States, migrants and refugees are being vilified. Public officials whose main responsibility is to bring people together are actively, and I should say effectively, pulling them apart. The Genocide Convention was the first human rights treaty of the United Nations system. This speaks to the significance of the convention. In addition to setting out the norms related to the punishment of the crime of genocide, I believe that one of the most important contributions of the convention is the norm that establishes the responsibility to prevent genocide. And I underline responsibility to prevent. Observing a norm is not only about honoring its content, it is about making it effective. Preventing genocide does not mean responding when the crime is already unfolding before our eyes. By the time that we can claim that we are sure there is genocide underway, we have already failed in our promise of never again, and we have failed the purpose of the convention and our responsibility to prevent. The responsibility to prevent falls to all of us, rather than to any one actor alone. Nor can it be successful without active contributions by everyone, by regional organizations, states, international organizations, civil society, and individuals. We all have a role to play. There are multiple institutional arrangements to advance this work. A number of mandates at the United Nations operate on the basis of prevention as a core function. I cannot see prevention as separate in any way from human rights monitoring and human rights protection. Outside the United Nations, many regional and sub-regional arrangements, many state institutions, many civil society initiatives work day in and day out to advance this agenda. All this said, we, the international community, as representatives of our organization and as individuals, must do more, and we must do it earlier. We must fight for a world where people are no longer targeted because of the color of their skin, their ethnic background, their religious faith, or by any other form of identity. While we cannot undo the failures of the past, we can at least learn from them and strive to prevent future atrocity crimes. This is not an easy task. It is one that requires dedication, perseverance, and unquestionable will. Dear friends, I started this intervention by honoring the privilege to serve. I end it by reiterating my commitment to service, hand in hand with all of you in the pursuit of human rights for a better and just world for current and future generations. I thank you.
I realized that Adama has a train to catch to New York, having just gotten off a plane from Abu Dhabi to get here this morning. Can you imagine? And then he's going from there to Albania. Armenia, just so you can imagine, and that's just in a couple of days. I don't know how a body does that, although I used to do that. I've given that up, but I wish you luck for all of that. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us. It's my great pleasure now to ask Monica Palacio, who is the director of the DC Office of Human Rights, which is a very active, extraordinary organization. We're a city that's very lucky to have you in charge of that office and to be so active as you have been for the past, I think, 5 to 6 years. I do hope everyone in this room will start to follow her extraordinary leadership in that role in a city that's not always easy to stand up for all of the critical human rights that you represent. Thank you very much for being here to introduce the next awardee.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to have to take my glasses on and put them off. I'm new to this glasses thing, so work with me a little bit. I do want to see all of you, but I also need to read my notes. Good evening, distinguished guests and awardees. I am truly thrilled to be with you this evening. My name again is Monica Palacio, and I've lived in the District of Columbia for 27 years, and I've lived in the U.S. since I was 3, for many more years than 27, from the time my family moved here from Colombia. And if you all are most likely very familiar with the history of Colombia, and my parents came here fleeing violence, specifically political violence. So the reasons they came have stayed with me ever since I was 3. And I've had the privilege to serve as a director of my amazing organizations now for just over 5 years. And I believe I have the best job in the city, because our mission is enormous, and I love a challenge. OHR is tasked, the Office of Human Rights is tasked with enforcing one of the most expansive and progressive civil rights and anti-discrimination statutes in the United States, which includes protections for women who need to breastfeed at work, for families who need to rent a place to live, and for workers who deserve to have a workplace free from discrimination and harassment. As I see it, my job is to think about every person, every identity group, every constituency, every vulnerable population, and all people from all backgrounds in the district. It's really a great job. And I get to work with amazing women leaders like Karen. She is truly a human rights champion. She's a woman who has always embodied unbridled vision, heartfelt hope, and the ability to think strategically and mobilize resources to get things done. Now, that combination can be hard to find, right? You can have great ideas, you can have great optimism, but you can't always execute. Karen does. Karen and I met almost 25 years ago when I was fresh out of law school, what a friend of mine calls a baby lawyer. And I decided to work for this amazing new organization called Public Allies. And some of you may have heard of Public Allies. Michelle Obama was one of its founders in Chicago, but Karen Mulhauser was one of its founders as well. And the original name of Public Allies was the Center for Careers in Public Life, which really was intriguing to me as someone who was coming out of law school, trying to be an advocate, wanting to have an impact, and I wanted to use my newly found skills for good and not for evil. It's not easy to do in Washington, D.C. sometimes. So, you know what I mean. And Karen, as one of its board members, wasn't some enigmatic person whose name was on a piece of paper who attended some secret meetings behind closed doors. You know the board members I'm talking about. Karen was accessible. Karen was always there, and she was always driving us and leading us. And for a young woman to see this, having only worked for men my entire life up to that point, it was just a thrill, and I don't think she knows that she made this indelible impact not just on me, but on thousands and thousands of young adult professional women in the district in the 1990s. Now, mind you, I graduated from a law school that had just reached its 50% male-female population in 1993. So things weren't changing as quickly as they needed to. But I felt like Karen saw so far beyond this. She wanted to drive us to work hard to change things. And it felt like everywhere she went, she took 20 or 30 of us with her, right? She knew how to build an army of young women. And that's how I first met Karen. I also wanted to share that Karen and I reconnected after some years, 5 years ago when I became the director, and she immediately, my phone rang and she said, "Monica, I have a great idea." And I was like, uh-oh, here comes Karen. We're going to work together. This is fantastic. And she agreed to serve as a commissioner on the district's Commission of Human Rights. She's also been a champion of trying to pass CEDAW in the district and to really, yes, and was successful in introducing the legislation in 2015, and we haven't given up on it, right, Karen? We're going to make it happen. But the fact that Karen has been selected to receive this incredibly prestigious award comes as no surprise to me and probably many of you. She's a social justice champion. She's a visionary, and it's truly my honor to stand with her on the stage tonight and welcome her to receive her award. Please join me.
Well, Monica, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and I want to say that not only is there this evening's celebration of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but our commission is having an event on December 11, and I'll make sure you all get an invitation. And I want to join Steve and others in thanking NEA and Princess and Jill. Thank you so much for always being there. And it's just wonderful to have such a partner. Means so much to us. And I'd like to thank my husband, Fritz, in the audience there. And if I thanked everyone who hugged me tonight, we'd be here for bagels in the morning, so I won't do that. It is an honor beyond what any of you can understand that I'm receiving the Perdita Houston Human Rights Award. She was like the big sister that I never had. And we worked on gender equity issues throughout the time that we knew each other. And so this is incredibly special for me. Thank you so much. I thought it was honor enough to help select the people who got the award, and I tried to do that this year, and Paola says, no, we're giving it to you. So Perdita's amazing life includes being a journalist. She worked with Life magazine and Time magazine, and she wrote several books based on her work and experience in rural developing countries, and it was all about the empowerment of women and girls. So that's something that we had in common. Actually, Perdita is the reason that I got involved with UNA. She had been on the board, and she kept inviting me to things, and I got more and more interested in UNA's work. And my husband and I went to Mali in 1999 because she was the Peace Corps director there. And she returned to the U.S. the next year with ovarian cancer, and I was with her for the final months of her life. I think she stayed alive to finish her last book, which was Families as We Are. And while she could still walk, I organized a big book event in D.C. and another one up in New York because she had done a lot of contract work with the UN, and so they helped sponsor a big event for her. And I spent many evenings in her home the last weeks of her life. And this is somebody I learned so much about how to live from her and how to give. And then in those final weeks, I learned how to die. She did it very, very gracefully. I miss my big sister very much. Before she died, I asked if it would be okay with her if I organized a Perdita Houston Human Rights Award initiative where I would raise as much money as I could to give cash awards to women around the world who lived her values and supported the missions that she personified, and she said okay. And I went to UNA to be the fiscal sponsor, UNA-NCA. And they were this fiscal sponsor for several years where we did give cash awards and bring extraordinary women to the U.S. and introduce them to Congress and in rooms like this. And in more recent years, we've been giving non-cash awards, which is okay. And as I said, I helped select a lot of the people who got the awards, and it's such a great honor to get an award in her name. And in a recent interview regarding this award, I was asked what the most important human rights issues were in the last 70 years, and since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then I was also asked, what do you see will be the most important human rights issues in the next 70 years? So in thinking about that, there are many threads to the fabric of my life, but I'm going to talk about two of them that respond to those questions. First, my commitment to work on gender equity, locally, nationally, and internationally. And second, my background in science. Yes, science. Both of my parents were scientists, and I graduated from Antioch College with a biology degree. And I intended to do medical research, and after a couple of years in graduate school, I thought maybe I'd rather work with people than with rats. And actually thought I was a failure because I dropped out of school, but science has always been an important part of who I am. So in the 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think advancement on gender equity is one of the main issues that we should be recognizing. And after abandoning medical research, I taught high school sciences, and what happened with the transition to the rest of my life is that the students came to me to talk about their sexuality. And I was actually a pretty shy person at that time, so talking to teenagers about sexuality helped get me over my shyness. And I don't know if there's any water here. Yes. Sorry. So that really led to the next dozen years or so. I worked on reproductive rights and justice issues. I was the executive director of NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League, where I knew the mother of Peter Yo, who's here. She was on the board, and that's a very strong memory for me. And I was involved with Planned Parenthood in Seattle and in Washington, D.C., and it's just been something that's always been important to me, and it's just basic. If women cannot decide when or if to have children, they really can't avail themselves to all of the economic and education opportunities that people who don't get pregnant have. So that's been a basic thread in my life. Another basic thread, as I said, was science. And I trust the scientific method. I trust science. And now, at age 76, I have figured out what I want to do when I grow up. I want to join those who are helping to save the planet. When I read the recent United Nations report on climate change, I realized that tears were falling down my cheeks, realizing that we have a dozen years, 15, 20, that if we don't start doing things right, the planet is not going to be habitable. So everything else is moot. Seriously. We need to do what we can. It's a basic human right to have a planet to live on. So, and unless we do things right, remember that second question was, what is the most important human rights issue in the next 70 years? I don't know if we have 70 years to be working on human rights. So I'm not being over dramatic. This is real. And so I was kind of surprised that after the UN report, there was another month in the elections, and no one talked about it. None of the candidates talked about it. And that's because they were not hearing from their constituents. So what I'm going to do in the next 2 years is find ways to educate about the climate issues and the environment and the need to make changes, and encourage them to talk to their elected officials and the candidates and bring change, because it's the politicians who write the laws that govern our lives and govern our planet. So that's what I'm going to do when I grow up. And I'd like to, encourage any of you to think of ways that you can also inspire the candidates, which means we need to inspire their constituents to talk about these issues, because they're not going to do it otherwise. So I wish I could talk to Perdita. Perdita, what would you do? And so I have these imagined conversations with her every once in a while, and she helps me along the way. So I want to thank you all very much, and learn more about Perdita Houston, you can Google her, and she's a real hero, and as I said, I miss my big sister.
We've talked about a lot of challenging issues these days, and I'm optimistic with the kind of leadership we've already honored that we're going to continue to overcome those challenges. A person who's been probably helping us to overcome, in a way that not everybody is aware, the challenges of the financing and support of the administration of the United States government for the United Nations has been under siege fairly dramatically. And it's the good leadership, the extraordinary leadership of the Better World campaign, in concert with others, led by Peter Yao, who I'm introducing to make the next award, that there's been generally broad, significant success in bringing people forward to be new collaborators going forward for the next couple of years. But the job isn't over, and the problems keep rising, and we need his leadership to carry us forward for the next several years. Peter Yao is the president of the Better World campaign. He's the senior policy vice president for the United Nations Foundation, and we're very proud as UNA-NCA to consider ourselves collaborating with his organization as a sister institution. Peter, please come forward and make the next presentation.
Thank you, Steve. And Karen, I called my mother last night, and I said I was following you on the stage, and she was, first of all, incredibly excited, and second of all, said thank you for your commitment to inclusion and making sure that everybody has a seat at the table. And she remains inspired by your work, and as do we all. So thank you, Karen. So it is a great pleasure to help present the Tex Harris Diplomacy Award today to a great American leader for global human rights, Ambassador Robert King. This is a particular pleasure for me. Bob and I are longtime friends and colleagues. We worked together on Capitol Hill, traveled together to far-flung places like Libya and North Korea, found ways to support each other's work while Bob served at the United States Department of State. So I'm not objective when it comes to Bob King. I'm already a big fan. And as avid consumers of news, many of you know Bob from his last job as U.S. Ambassador for North Korea Human Rights Issues. Soon after taking office in 2009, President Obama asked Bob to take on the important job of shining a light on the horrendous human rights situation in North Korea and rallying global community together to pressure North Korea to change. In the 8 years that Bob served in this position, this is exactly what Bob did. Within 2 weeks of assuming his job, Bob was at the United Nations Human Rights Council, denouncing the egregious human rights situation being perpetuated by the DPRK and demanding accountability for those who are responsible. He worked tirelessly to pry open North Korea to information from the outside world, particularly by supporting Radio Free Asia and access by South Korean media to the north. Bob was a strong proponent of sanctions on the North Korean regime to attempt to bring about change, yet at the same time helped facilitate food assistance to the North Korean people. He advocated on behalf of Americans detained in North Korea under horrendous conditions and brought one home on a trip to Pyongyang. Human rights is now central to the debate over North Korea, in part because Bob traveled to key global capitals and UN gatherings, meeting with the right people in government and civil society, and convincing them that North Korean human rights issues were not just a rounding error in the broader non-proliferation agenda with the DPRK. But to those of us who have known and worked with Bob for years, we weren't surprised that Bob had shaken up so many world leaders with his human rights message. Bob worked for 25 years on Capitol Hill as chief of staff to a member of Congress who broke new ground in the quest for human rights, Representative Tom Lantos, including serving as staff director of the House Foreign Affairs Committee for 8 years. In his role on the Hill, through hearings, legislation, press releases, statements, I'd say tweets, but this was pre-tweet era, Bob spoke out for human rights everywhere, from China and Tibet to Darfur to Russia and Eastern Europe. There are political prisoners who were freed as a result of Bob's tireless efforts, victims of conflict and marginalized groups aided, and journalists allowed to report. Bob was effective in part because he had credibility. He had a PhD in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He has written 5 books and 40 articles on international affairs, and he was a White House Fellow under President Carter. Now, the White House Fellowship leads me to 3 things that you probably don't know about Bob. The entire reason he got his White House Fellowship was because he proposed to take on the responsibility of negotiating the return to Budapest of the Royal Crown of Hungary, which had been carefully stored in Fort Knox since the end of World War II. His proposal not only got him a prestigious fellowship at the White House, it got the eternal gratitude of the Hungarian people when it was returned to them as a result of Bob's efforts. Second, Bob's part of a dynamic duo. Bob's wife, Dr. Kay King, who's with us this evening, served with us in the Lantos operation and in other prestigious posts on Capitol Hill, including for Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Their careers blossomed together, and she was equally powerful force for human rights in the legislative branch. Third, Bob's secret passion in the quest to bake the world's best chocolate chip cookie. His different variations of this quintessential American classic are so legendary, in fact, that Bob committed to publish a collection of his recipes during his retirement, which I'm sure he's working on as we speak. Bob is truly a good human being who epitomizes everything that Tex Harris stood for during Tex's long State Department and federal government career. A willingness to bring light to human rights abuses, even when it makes people uncomfortable. An ability to work globally, often behind the scenes, to advance our foreign policy interests, and a commitment to public service. Thank you, Tex. Bob never misses an opportunity to stand up and take action for human rights. As we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights this year, I can think of no greater recipient for the Tex Harris Award than Ambassador Robert King. Please join me in welcoming Bob to the stage.
I really enjoyed Peter's comments. I could listen to him a lot longer. I'm grateful for the recognition the United Nations Association has given me by extending me this honor. There are several people that deserve thanks. My wife is first on that list. Peter mentioned that we worked together on Capitol Hill. We were actually married before we started working on Capitol Hill, and she endured, in the 8 years that I was at the State Department, my frequent travels to a lot of other places, leaving her at home alone. But I appreciate her effort and her support. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for Peter Yo. Peter talked about our experience working together. The 8 years that we were working together on the House Foreign Affairs Committee was one of the funnest times on the Hill and in Washington that I've had. And I look back on those days very fondly. During this time, we were able to pass legislation on international AIDS. We were able to pass the North Korea Human Rights Act, which got me a job at the State Department. We were able to deal with the Human Rights Council restructuring. We were able to deal with a lot of issues with regard to UN funding. And it was nice to be in a situation where we could affect and influence what was happening and make a difference in areas that were important. And I appreciate that Peter continues to work on these issues in the positions that he's in now with the UN Foundation. I wanted to say something about some of the career Foreign Service officers and the important role that they play. I'm particularly honored to have Tex Harris here today, the man after whom this award was named and who was the first recipient of it. In many ways, Tex personifies the quality and caliber of the career Foreign Service officers and the role that they play in terms of furthering United States foreign policy, and particularly our policy in the area of human rights. I can say these things because I'm not a career Foreign Service officer. These career Foreign Service officers get stuck with the less glamorous tasks. The fun tasks get taken over by the political appointees who do the serious issues, and the other things that need to be taken care of are passed on to these Foreign Service officers. But they do their job, and they do it well. And Tex personifies the kind of actions that these career Foreign Service officers take. I'm grateful for what he has done. I'm grateful for what all of the Foreign Service officers have done in terms of furthering our policy on human rights. It was my honor a couple of years ago to present the award, the Tex Harris Award, to Eric Richardson, who had been the political counselor at the U.S. mission to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. I'd worked with Eric when he was on the Hill as a Pearson Fellow. I worked with him in Geneva on North Korean issues, and he continues to play a very important role, typical of the kind of work that all of these Foreign Service officers are doing. It's a particularly noteworthy time to be thinking about the issue of human rights, because in 4 days we will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration. As I make comments about human rights, I feel very aware of Eleanor Roosevelt looking over my shoulder. She played an enormous role in the development of the document that has made such a difference in terms of human rights. The one thing that I think we need to remember as Americans is that more than anything else, it is our values that make us American. It's not that we speak the same language necessarily, not that we have ancestors from the same place, not that we have other elements that are common in people in many countries. The thing that makes us different is that we share the same values. And the values that we share are values of human rights, of democracy, the kinds of things that make us what we are. And it's this common ideology that more than anything reflects what it means to be an American. And as we look at the 70th anniversary of the International Declaration on Human Rights, it's important to see that in the context of these values that we as Americans share. Eleanor Roosevelt's action and the actions in the human rights effort in 70 years ago basically took those values that are so central and fundamental to who we are as Americans and gave them an international credibility, because those are the values that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We need to continue our commitment to those rights and to those values. This is not an easy time for human rights and for democratic values in the United States and in our foreign policy. Domestically, in the United States, we're facing the largest one-year increase in the number of hate crimes. We've seen a resurgence in racist demonstrations and the rise of white nationalists that have been disruptive to our country and to our nation. Our leader has declared election fraud because his presidential opponent received 3 million more popular votes than he did, and the efforts to restrict minority voting that have followed the efforts to deal with the question of voter fraud. It's ironic on the issue of voter fraud that when there is a verified case of voter fraud, we heard nothing from the leader about the importance of dealing with that issue. I think it's important that we keep in mind that human rights are not something that we put enshrined on the top of the mountain and we don't have to worry about it anymore. In our own situation here in the United States, we need to continue to press for those ideas and values that unite us as Americans. Internationally, the United States has played an increasingly troublesome role in terms of our commitment to human rights. One of the things that I found most upsetting was when the United States withdrew from participation in the UN Human Rights Council. That decision was the wrong decision. It was a poor decision, and it should not have been taken. Yes, there are problems with the Human Rights Council. Yes, there are countries there who are hypocritical in terms of not supporting human rights in their own countries. But that is not justification for picking up our marbles and going home. That is only the reason for us to continue the effort and continue the fight and continue the struggle. When I became the special envoy for North Korea human rights, one of the first things I did, as Peter mentioned, was to go to Geneva and deal with the UN Human Rights Council. North Korea was up for consideration of its Universal Periodic Review, and that was an action 2 weeks after I was sworn in. I was in Geneva participating in the discussion there of North Korea's human rights record. I met with a number of ambassadors from a number of different countries about what we were concerned about with regard to North Korea. The United States had withdrawn from participation in the Human Rights Council in the previous administration at the time that I came in 2009. One of the things that struck me as I met with diplomat after diplomat, there had been a few Americans who'd been over there since the change in administrations at that time. I was the first ambassador who'd been there participating in UN events at the Human Rights Council. The ambassador from Nigeria, who left the next day to become the foreign minister of Nigeria, said to me, "I am so happy to see the United States engaging again in the Human Rights Council. We need the United States to participate. We need United States leadership on these issues." And I am happy that during the time of the last 8 years, we were able to accomplish a great deal in terms of putting pressure on North Korea. The Commission of Inquiry, which led to important information becoming public about North Korea's human rights violations. These things are all an important part of what we've done and what we need to do. And it's important that we continue to do that. Unfortunately, the administration currently sees human rights as largely an issue that can be used in its transactional view of foreign policy. Human rights is a good stick, a cudgel, that we can beat the North Koreans so that they'll listen to us on issues that really count. This is why, for example, the administration gave a great deal of attention to North Korean human rights. 10% of the President's State of the Union speech a year ago, or the first part of this year, was devoted to North Korea, and a good portion of that was on North Korean human rights. You may recall that in the audience there was a North Korean defector, a man who had lost his leg as he tried to escape North Korea to come to China and South Korea. He held up his crutches as he was introduced by the President, and as the members of the House and Senate gave this young man a standing ovation. The same week, there was a meeting in the Oval Office with a number of North Korean defectors who were there. The administration seemed to be moving in a very positive direction on human rights. A month and a half later, the President announced, or the President didn't bother to announce, the North Koreans who, or the South Koreans who extended the invitation from North Korea, announced that President Trump would meet with with the leader Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Once that meeting was scheduled, not a word about North Korea human rights. Human rights is not a stick that we use to get something else. Human rights is a value in and of its own that we need to continue to press because it's the right thing to do. I'm hopeful I appreciate what the United Nations Association does in terms of encouraging respect for human rights, encouraging respect for the UN institutions. I appreciate your efforts. They are extremely important, and it is necessary that we continue your efforts because the United Nations plays such a critical role in what we do in our human rights policy. Thank you very much for what you do. Thank you.
I guess there was a little collusion around Mr. Lantos that brought the three of you together, but that's just fine. It's turned out wonderfully for this evening. I should have mentioned, I neglected to early on in recognizing that one of our former Louis B. Schoen awardees, Ambassador Robert White, is with us tonight. Where are you, Mr. Ambassador? I had a chance to meet you a little earlier. We'll let him know that mentioned him a little after the fact, but thank you very much. I now have the great pleasure of calling on Bruce McNamara, who has been a member of our advisory council from the time that he joined the Community Foundation, which now has a new name. He's the president of the Greater Washington Community Foundation that targets the effort, and it's very helpful. Bruce, I think, is a wonderful presenter of our award for community service in the Washington, D.C. greater area, because he covers and over his career has been both an internationalist. I discovered he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay, and that he served, as I did know, as president of one of the most effective action-oriented NGOs called TechnoServe. And in many ways, he's brought to the foundation an action orientation of an NGO leader to a community that values NGO leadership, and that's what we're going to be celebrating tonight when he makes the next award. So Bruce, would you come forward and make the award?
Well, good evening, everybody. I guess I'd start with just a quick show of hands. How many people here honestly knew that there was a D.C. Office of Human Rights? This is a special audience because I think many people, I mean, and it is not unusual that when we have conversations, even in our community about human rights, we often think of it as an issue for overseas and for over there. And as Bob and others have highlighted, as we full well know, we are ourselves a long way from kind of realizing the vision and the values that you articulated so well, Bob, and that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And therefore, we at the United Nations Association think it appropriate that every year we do honor actors in the human rights agenda where, right here at home, where human rights actually begins. Every year, the association presents the Community Human Rights Award to a person or organization who has provided leadership to advance the cause of human rights through a local group or organization in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and or the Northern Virginia area. And this year, we are so pleased to grant that award to Empower DC and its founder and director, Parisa Norouzi. Empower DC is a citywide, membership-based organization dedicated to effecting social change through a democratic, self-help empowerment approach to civic engagement. Since its founding by Parisi 15 years ago, Empower has worked ceaselessly to give voice and power to the voiceless and powerless as a strident advocate, as a tireless organizer, and as a highly effective agent for self-empowerment. This particularly as relates to affordable housing in Ivy City, in Berry Farms, and more broadly, but also in expanding access to affordable child care and in improving public education. As an advocate, if you're not speaking truth to power, and if you're not upsetting somebody somewhere, sometime, you're not doing your job. At the Community Foundation, it's our pleasure to have a front seat to and be a witness to many organizations that wear the advocacy mantle. Very few of them do it nearly as well as Empower DC. And for those efforts, Parisa, and for the empowering nature of your approach, UNA-NCA is pleased to award Empower DC and you, Parisa, with a Community Human Rights Award.
I wouldn't be a good community organizer if I didn't at least demonstrate that it's not just me, right? It's a group of people doing this work. And thank you so much. We're very honored to receive this award, but also just to be in the room and in the presence of so many people who share our values, as we've talked about, and our pursuit of freedom and human dignity and justice for all people. It's interesting because as you guys were talking and as I was learning from the stories of my colleagues here, I was able to reflect so much on my own journey. And as was mentioned, I became one of the co-founders of Empower DC 15 years ago. This is our anniversary, 15th anniversary. And thank you. And I had started out in the environmental movement, and I had started working with some of the larger environmental groups that were headquartered in DC, but didn't really engage with DC communities. And there was a couple of things that really frustrated me that caused me to turn to real grassroots local community organizing. And one of them was that, as a lover of the earth and nature and animals, I realized that if we didn't pursue human dignity and justice for human beings on this planet, we were very unlikely to be able to achieve justice and dignity for other creatures as well. And that was part of the, awakening that I had as a younger person about the necessity of pursuing justice and dignity for all human beings, that the planet really has no chance if we continue to interact with our own fellow earthlings in the cruel ways that we do, right? And then the other thing was just recognizing that we pour so much energy and attention into the Capitol building and places like this, and we pour so little attention into the impacted communities. And so my vision when we started organizing with Empower DC was really to continue the tradition of community organizing that has long taken place in the District of Columbia, and recognizing the critical social role that local residents have played in all of the most important social movements in our country. And of course, DC residents don't get the recognition that they deserve. The city doesn't get the recognition that it deserves for being on the forefront of the abolition movement, of the suffrage movement, of the civil rights movement and other movements for human rights. And of course, we live in a city that is so divided and so unjust. And of course, I could rattle off all kinds of statistics about it, but And, we work in a church basement, and we work with public housing residents. We work with people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. We work with people who are trying to survive in this city on minimum wage or less. And we almost never come into contact with some of the people that you all may work with on a regular basis. Other people who share values of human rights, but who are in a completely different arena of this city, in the Senate and the House, in the embassies. We have such divisions in the city that I think one of the things that I really want to take away from this experience tonight is to do more on my end to try to build more connections with folks like yourself, because we can't achieve any of this work if we don't know each other, if we don't communicate with each other, and if we remain in those silos. But thank you. So one of the things that fascinated me when we started Empower DC was just that image that DC, the residents of DC, the city of DC, is the air that is breathed by all of those people who come to the House and Senate, all of those people who represent the international community, everybody who comes here because it's the nation's capital to air their grievances, to seek their needs. Us residents, we are the ones that set that environment. And imagine if we were such a empowered community, such an empowered city, that everywhere you went in the District of Columbia, you were seeing messages of freedom, messages of people organizing to uplift themselves. In our city, we have this progressive veneer. There's a lot of, people really believe that we're very progressive and we've got all these great laws. And the reality, when you're really paying attention, is that a lot of that is window dressing, and we have a huge amount of suffering going on in the district. And the votes of the city council, the mayoral administration, all of this is perpetuating and making worse those conditions. So I really thought, well, there's probably no more important place in the country than to do community organizing than in the District of Columbia. Because if we can truly achieve that environment of organization and empowerment, every time somebody comes to the nation's capital, they're going to have to confront it. We will be the air that they breathe. They will have to choke on our message, inhale it or choke on it, whatever if they don't like it. And then I would hope our influence can reverberate, throughout the world. And I think that's part of the reason why there actually has been international sometimes or, corporate opposition to social movements here in the District of Columbia. Some people do recognize the importance of the people who exist here, and it's part of the history of this country as well, that, people, again, we're on the forefront of the abolition movement. We're on the forefront of the suffrage movement. And then today, look at our political situation. We have no voting representation in Congress. We have, a local $14 billion budget, but it has to be all approved by the president, ultimately. We have a very repressive situation here. We're treated as a colony. And let me just be clear, the reason why is because it was the first majority black city, major American city to be majority black in this country, and because of the history and current day continued institutionalized racism that exists in our country, and that plays out in our city whether or not we have black elected officials or not. Every policy that's being made disproportionately harms and impacts black residents in our city. And so we're working with Berry Farm residents and Ivy City residents, which to me it's so interesting to reflect on the fact that these are two of our city's most historic black communities, founded just minutes, really, just minor years after emancipation, after slavery and the ongoing racist land use policies and all of these things that have created the conditions that exist, which we've never confronted and we've never healed. And yet we expect people to somehow be able to not just survive but thrive, or the mayor says, find the pathway to the middle class in this environment where the city has become more and more just an exclusive place for wealthy people. So I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be in the room with you, to reflect on these things, to think about how we are all part of this same movement, and to be celebrated by people like you who share these values is the greatest honor. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, as Ella Baker said. So let's continue. Thank you.
I have the great pleasure of introducing the person I introduced hours ago, Paula Boland, Director of UNA-NCA. Thank you, Paula, for organizing all of this and bringing us together.
Wow. I really feel that we've been bringing human rights close to home. Particularly today, as we are gathering here for such a special celebration. Many thanks, Steve, and all of your fellow leaders in UNA-NCA, from our board, advisory council, staff, partners, sponsors, volunteers. All of you have been instrumental in our tireless work throughout the year through education and advocacy for a strong US-UN partnership. We could have not done it alone, and I'm looking forward to another strong year. Thank you all for joining us this evening as we celebrate this historical milestone that represents the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that has impacted history and changed lives around the world and remains as relevant as ever today. The process under the amazing leadership of Eleanor Roosevelt that led to the signing of the Declaration marked the beginning of a movement of peace and a movement of human rights. And this movement has made wonderful progress, great strides, as you've heard before during this evening. But unfortunately, continuing conflict, abuses around the world kept occurring and rising, and our job is not done. More than ever, we have to come together to realize that all of the principles of the Declaration really can be summed up with the fact that we are all equal and free human beings, and that this Declaration is really the beacon of hope that will guide our work moving forward, work that we can only do together as we consider ourselves equal human beings. So this is an opportunity not only to acknowledge all the accomplishments, but to really recommit ourselves to all those 30 articles that we have in the Declaration. So quoting the former High Commissioner for Human Rights, Seyrat al-Hussein, who was our Louis Bisson honoree last December, these human rights are not country-specific. They are not a reward for good behavior or particular to a certain area or social group. They are the rights of people of every color, from any race or ethnic group, whether or not they have disabilities, they're citizens or migrants, no matter their sex, their class, their sex, their age or sexual orientation. The Declaration really represents this beacon of hope that will guide us all. And the best way to honor it and to hope for a real peaceful and more just world is by standing up together for human rights and keeping this movement of peace and human rights going. So thank you so much for all of you have done throughout the year, for your wonderful accomplishments in the field, and happy 70th anniversary. We have a short video for you, and with that we're going to close the event. And thank you again. Happy 70th anniversary.
Let us, as members of the United Nations, conscious of our own shortcomings and imperfections, join our effort in good faith to live up to this high standard.
Todos os seres humanos podem invocar os direitos e as liberdades proclamados na presente declaração sem distinção alguma.
Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages.
Todos son iguales ante la ley y tienen sin distinción derecho a igual protección de la ley.
Брак может быть заключен только при свободном и полном согласии обеих вступающих в брак сторон.
Tout individu a droit à une nationalité. Nul ne peut être arbitrairement privé de sa nationalité, ni du droit à changer de nationalité.
凡受刑事控告者，在未经获得辩护上所需的一切保证的公开审判而依法证实有罪以前，有权被视为无罪。
لكل فرد الحق في الحياة والحرية وسلامة شخصه.
प्रत्येक व्यक्ति को विचार और इसकी अभिव्यक्ति की स्वतंत्रता का अधिकार है.
Watu wote wamezaliwa huru, hadhi na haki zao ni sawa. Wote wamejaliwa akili na dhamiri, hivyo yapaswa watendeane kindugu.